Okay, we're back inside theCUBE, SiliconAngle.tv's exclusive coverage. I get excited when I have Todd Lipcon in the house here, CUBE alumni, Cloudera employee. What's your employee number?
I think 10 or 11.
10,
like
you're
that.
early, yeah, sub 20.
Yep.
If you're 10, that's good, then you're in the top 10. Glory days now in the hundreds of employees. Welcome back.
Thanks.
This is a little bit different setup. Normally we do the little table, but nice to be here at this exclusive first ever HBase conference. So you're all over the email trail, so all the stuff online, people go to SlideShare, they're either looking at some of the work you've done or influenced, obviously the code you've written. Take us through why, in your opinion, HBase is so popular right now. I mean, because just a few short years ago, it was just part of Hadoop, and you've had a community was growing, but why right now is HBase so popular?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of this trend around like real time in the news and the blogosphere and all that recently. And HBase basically brings this real time idea on top of Hadoop. So Hadoop is great for this batch analytics kind of back-end data warehousing kind of workloads. And then when you actually want to serve a website off of it, it probably kind of falls apart if you're just using HDFS and MapReduce. Like the minimum MapReduce job takes about 12 seconds in the newest versions, 24 seconds in older versions, whereas the minimum HBase query might take like 2 or 3 milliseconds. So it's a very different time scale it can work with.
So batch was very attractive with HDFS and MapReduce.
Right.
Again,
and don't get me wrong, batch is still attractive for a lot of workloads.
Well, 26 seconds. 20 seconds is not like days.
Right, yeah. I mean,
it's not weeks.
Compared to a lot of the existing database solutions, that's really fast, right?
Okay, so let's back to the analytics. So that became popular. Why not other solutions? Why not other databases?
I think HBase is the one that, for one, scales really well. It actually lives up to the claims of scalability. People are running it at 800 nodes, 1,000 node scale, petabyte scale. And also integrates best with Hadoop because it's part of the whole Hadoop ecosystem. It's like our security infrastructure is the same security infrastructure. All our storage is on HDFS, which everyone trusts to store their data really efficiently and reliably.
It's a nice operating model from an integration
standpoint. Everything kind of fits together, works together, it's meant to work together. Whereas certainly there are a lot of other databases in the NoSQL space that say, okay, we can integrate with Hadoop, but they're more like an export-import kind of integrate with. They're not like a built-together kind of integrate with.
Okay, so now I want to ask you a personal question for the folks that know I've interviewed Todd before, and we always talk about computer science programs, and since the computer science degree has been in the news lately, the Yahoo CEO claims he got a computer science degree. I actually have a computer science degree, he has one as well. But you went to Brown, right? So what are some of the schools that you see out there? I mean, you guys are hiring new people.
Yep.
Obviously there's the known names, but just give us the rundown in your mind's eye and your experience of the schools that are graduating, the savviest computer scientists relative to this world of big data, which is Hadoop, operating systems, et cetera.
Yeah. So I think it's a lot of the traditional systems schools.
I know Brown's number one, so we'll stay
Brown, of course, is number one. We got, I think, 8 people from Brown right now at Cloudera, out of about 200-something employees. And then other top ones that stand out are probably Stanford, Berkeley, MIT is pretty good. SUNY Stony Brook actually has a very strong databases program. There's no one at Cloudera from there currently, but there's some other pretty interesting startups out of SUNY Stony Brook. I mentioned CMU is another top school in the database systems kind of area.
Anything outside the north? That's interesting. SUNY, that's New York, right?
Yeah,
Is that in New York?
University of New York. Yeah.
Any other programs, international, you've seen?
There's a couple of international schools, like EPFL has a pretty good systems program. It's in, I want to say, France or Switzerland. They're French-speaking, but I can't remember where across the border they are.
Someone was telling me Canada is a massive. There was is it Toronto?
Oh yeah, Waterloo.
Waterloo.
Good CS program.
Waterloo. I heard Waterloo. All right, there you have it. Those are the top schools, and soon to be a blog post on SiliconAngle. I have my list, pretty close to all those. The next question is, what do you think about this event? What are you hearing in the hallways? Obviously it's sold out, so it's obviously there's demand for the HBase conference. Yeah. Not a surprise, but what are you hearing in the hallways? I mean, we talked earlier about the keynote from Facebook, it was very impressive. Sharing the data, 1, 2, articulate, fast-paced, very high quality. Yeah. What are the things that you're seeing that are like, wow, this is cool?
Well, I've definitely spent a lot of the morning talking with like the Facebook guys and a lot of the community members who I mostly interact with online, but it's rare to get actual like face-to-face with them. So like Michael Stack from StumbleUpon, Karthik, who gave the keynote, and talked to him for a while. In terms of other attendees, there's definitely a lot of people who have a pretty surprisingly high level of, they're already pretty advanced HBase users. I was surprised by that. I tend to think of a lot of people being very new and excited by HBase, but not really deploying yet. There's some pretty big deploys, like multi-hundred node clusters I hadn't heard about before today, which is pretty cool.
Cool. How about application support within the HBase architecture? Are you seeing a lot of any developments around there?
Yeah, so a couple of other startups that have been founded recently. So Weeby Data, I don't know if you've had anybody from there.
Christoph was on.
Okay.
Had Aaron Kimball on her at Hadoop World.
Okay, yeah, so that's one example of a startup that's basically building an application platform on top of HBase to make it easier to build, normal apps on the infrastructure.
We had VDP Finder. We had VDP Finder on earlier. Mm-hmm. That's a stealth startup out of Palo Alto.
Right.
I founded that one.
Right.
I'm from VDP Finder. Who else have you seen?
So Continuity is another example.
We had Jonathan Gray
over there. I don't know if you've spoken about that. So there are a few of these startups that are kind of starting to emerge. I imagine there are a few more that I haven't heard about yet that'll come up in the next 6 months or a year.
Any other concepts and trends, topics and interests that are popping out that are surprises to you here that, or not surprises, that obviously, what are the top trending items? If we were Twitter and this was like, we were harvesting these verbal tweets in the hallways, what would be the trending items?
I think Eric Sammer, I don't know if he's been on here before, he had a pretty great tweet earlier where he said the atmosphere is more like a hackathon than a conference in a lot of ways. A lot of people, pretty high engineer population, pretty low business person population. Yeah. So I've heard a lot of talks about like what exactly is the semantics of the consistency when you do a bulk put, all these like very detailed things, which is
it's like
rare for a tech conference.
This is all developers.
Yeah,
it's like an alpha. I would say I'd categorize it as alpha.
Yeah, a lot of the San Francisco startups, but there are people here from Europe and the East Coast.
It's not just it's the leaders you think about: Facebook, Apple, Google, Netflix, Amazon. But I saw Fidelity Investments. We have media companies here, so it's getting diverse.
Yeah,
pharma.
Yeah, Gap is giving a presentation, or gave a presentation earlier today. They're storing their apparel catalog in HBase, which is not what you think of as like a leading edge technology, but it's pretty cool.
Well, I think it's really fantastic how far you guys have come. It's been great to be part of the Cloudera ecosystem, at least about being part of in your office for a year and a half and watching you guys grow. So congratulations on all your work with HBase. What are you working on now? You mentioned HDFS. Could you share with the folks kind of your current passion and focus?
Yeah, so currently I've been working on the HDFS High Availability project, probably for the last 6 months or so in earnest. So that's basically eliminating the single point of failure, which used to be in HDFS. So there's a single master node, now we have a failover for it. So if that should crash or the network gets unplugged or something, it can automatically fail over to another node which takes over seamlessly.
This is something that we've heard in the DevOps community, where DevOps is much more of a conversation now with Cloudera's movement into more production-focused environments.
Yeah.
And the theme that I'm hearing, not only here, but also consistent with what's going on in the past few months outside of this ecosystem, is the production environment numbers are up, right? So overall, so that eBay was on talking about it.
People care more about metrics now, and more people care more about monitoring.
There's uptime.
Uptime.
I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
Shit, you can't be down.
Right.
Like some businesses just can't be down.
A lot of that's an artifact of the real time versus batch, right? If you're in a batch environment and your job runs once an hour, then you can take a 1 hour maintenance window, no problem. But if you're actually, all of your website visitors are hitting HBase, then you can't really do even a 10-minute window is expensive.
I thought Kartik had a good discussion about how he's handling his replication. I think he said backup and recovery within the cluster, within the data center, and then outside the data center.
Yeah. They want to do the fastest backup first, and if the whole data center explodes, then they can go to the slow one.
I thought that's interesting, and I was just commenting to Michelle Bailey, who's here from VDP Finder, that the next data domain is out there here in this marketplace, because backup and recovery, data protection.
Yeah, that's come up a lot recently.
It's going to be a hot issue. But I think high availability is something that we've heard, like, hey, the DevOps conversation is really interesting around cloud, because DevOps, you think of Node.js, you think of Hadoop, developers doing operational things.
Right.
You talk to some purists, they're ops devs, where it's pure ops, no dev, because they have such strict high availability requirements that they won't even let any open source into these projects. So we're seeing those barriers come down in these verticals. So I think that's a really important area.
That's one thing Cloudera has been focusing on, is like DevOps is great and it's pretty exciting as a developer to be part of it. We found a lot of companies out there don't have the DevOps culture. It's slow to move into that kind of thing. Like, people are still operators or developers at most companies.
In the classic enterprise out there, there's consumerization of IT going on, but what's happening there is they're definitely decoupled. Ops and developers, they're shooting arrows at each other every day.
That's what we see in our customer base in a lot of cases. So we want to build tooling that makes it easier for a traditional ops person to actually run Hadoop and not have to feel like, oh crap, we have to find these DevOps unicorns that maybe only exist in San Francisco, and how do we hire them? It's really hard to find them.
Exactly. Right? Well, there's a whole personnel conversation, the training and requirements to get in.
Yep.
With that, let me ask you a question about the community. So the community of Hadoop has grown. There's a lot of inbound migration of new personnel, new people, new personalities, and with that is always more politics and more eccentric behavior. Share with the folks out there, what's the state of the current community? In your mind's eye, have you seen it right now? Describe to them what's it like, and try to compare what it was like, what's changed about it, good, bad, or whatever.
Yeah, so actually right now it's pretty healthy, I'd say. The Hadoop community in particular is actually gearing up for a Hadoop 2.0 release. We're in the process of voting on a beta release of that this week. So fingers crossed, if no one vetoes the release for any kind of like bugs or anything, we should have a release this week. So all that feels pretty healthy. Our release momentum picked up a lot. We were collaborating pretty well in the open source, even though maybe competitors who are actually contributing to the same open source project. So that all feels pretty good. And in terms of the overall feel, the growth is definitely evident. There are many more companies that are now contributing code than there used to be. Even these big companies like IBM are starting to put patches in. It's cool to see like all these new people showing up and bringing code to the project.
Well, I was just at EMC World. We're actually broadcasting it live this week, so we're here and there. And EMC's love their messaging. Cloud meets big data. They're increasing the demand and educating the enterprises around big data. Do you see that evolution around consumerization IT affecting cloud deployments around Hadoop and how the architecture on the operational side? Because the big debate is private cloud, public cloud, and now this new hybrid cloud, which, cloud is just a code word for outsourcing, right? So
I don't know what cloud's even a code word for.
It's okay, I'm going to outsource something, right? But there's requirements involved, right? So what are the challenges from your perspective on getting Hadoop to the point where it's fully extended out into the enterprise? And right now, it's pretty much the big vendors are saying Hadoop is it, and they're all writing connectors for it. So we're seeing that. So what is those challenges for you to make it over?
So I think the off-site cloud thing hasn't really caught on with Hadoop yet because data has so much inertia. So it's great to say I can run 1,000 machines in EC2 pretty quickly, but if all my data is in a database in my data center, then the network bandwidth between my data center and EC2 is just not fast enough to make that a reasonable proposition. Similarly, the nice thing about these public clouds is you can spin up instances and then shut them down, bring them back up. But if you have a bunch of data sitting there, you can't spin them down because you lose your data. So you end up having to keep your data elsewhere, spin them up, copy a bunch of data, copy it back, spin it down.
Yeah, so you get
and
charged.
You get charged on all the copies. It's pretty inefficient. You end up spending half your time copying instead of processing. So we're finding the private cloud deployments like within a data center much more popular among our customers. Certainly some of the newer startups are kind of all cloud, and they find it more useful. But
yeah, I think that's a good observation. Thank you for sharing that. The other thing I wanted to ask you is the vendors, when you guys started, you had no competition, right? And then the big hubbub was Hortonworks, right? And I was there at that event. It was kind of fun to watch Yahoo spin that out.
Summit last year.
And but a lot of things mellowed out because everyone else came in.
Right.
HP bought Vertica. You got EMC with Greenplum.
Yep.
You got now SAP with HANA. You have all these competing architectures competing for a big data position, technically.
Right.
So what have you been seeing? And I've noticed that they've been kind of yielding to the fact that
it's funny you mentioned
happening.
Like IBM has Netezza, but IBM is also doing Hadoop, right?
Yeah.
And EMC has Greenplum, but they're also doing Hadoop. So all these companies,
EMC
they
backed down from MapR.
Right. So they've
yielded to Hadoop. The genie's out of the bottle. It's unstoppable. This train has left the station.
Hadoop has kind of been accepted as the platform.
Yep.
And people with these other platforms, they're more specialized. Maybe they can do data warehousing workloads better than we can for specific workloads. But as a general purpose big data thing, I think Hadoop is kind of it.
Yeah, so what do you think, what's their technical strategy in your mind? The connectors is what, to connect with Hadoop? Is that more of just a embrace and extend philosophy, or is it legitimate work that they're doing? I'm generalizing now, IBM, HP, and the big guys.
I think currently like those other data warehouses are pretty complementary in that Hive is great. It can do a lot of workloads faster if they're really big workloads, but it doesn't really do advanced analytics as well. It doesn't do like windowing functions and other kind of advanced SQL. So those other data warehouses have like a 30-year lead on Hive in some of these aspects. So I don't think they're going away next week.
Yeah. So I love talking tech with you because you're a wealth of knowledge. Let's talk about the network problems, right? So in big data, network latency seems to be a bottleneck with virtualization and compute. I mean, whether you're doing some work in the cloud or you got a data center with a lot of machines and multiple cores, it's pretty heavy duty. network seems to be the bandwidth problem.
Yeah, so on bigger clusters, network becomes an issue. On smaller, like single rack clusters, we found it's usually not. Because you can get a single top of rack switch that does 10 gigabit Ethernet pretty cheap now. There are companies like Arista that have come up in the last, I guess, 5 or 10 years that have made 10 gigabit Ethernet pretty inexpensive. It gets more expensive when you start getting to like a 400 node cluster, and all of a sudden you've got 10 racks worth of machines all trying to go to some giant core switch, and that gets pretty pricey. So it's these kind of bigger rollouts that are more expensive, and the network becomes more of a bottleneck.
How did you guys handle that?
So we've done some work there is like compression on the wire, for example. So the MapReduce shuffle, when it transfers data between machines, will compress it just to try to reduce the total amount of data going through those core switches. HDFS's replication policies are all built around this idea of trying to minimize the total amount of data going through the core switch. So we definitely built that into the software, this sort of expectation that cross-rack transfer is expensive and kind of always will be, because whenever we get that cheap core switch for 10 gig, all of a sudden we're going to have something faster on the single racks. It's always that ratio.
Yeah, no, and there's all this talk about software networking and Nicira, doing some work with OpenStack, and so it's like a whole nother generation of networking companies evolving.
I think a lot of that, though, has to do more with like reconfigurability and elasticity, rather than just strict performance. So, like I said before, it's hard to move a Hadoop cluster around your data center because it's got all this data sitting on those machines, and you're not going to just move them somewhere else. It'd be too expensive, right?
What's the conversation like around application developers? Because again, this conference really starts teasing out this notion that the application integration into HBase is critical to get those real times. And we heard Mike Olson, your CEO, talk at Hadoop World, tsunami of applications, and Ping Lee's got a $100 million fund.
Yep.
Does the data is like a very important component of the application. It used to be app and infrastructure, and then that got decoupled. That worked great. Now you got data. Is data bound into the application? You got SSD memory, so you got good memory now, capabilities, large number of memory. What is the data? Is it bundled into the app? Infrastructure, is it decoupled?
Yeah,
all of the above. I mean, it's like an architecture re-engineering.
The lines are definitely blurring. So there's this new feature in HBase called co-processors, which allow you to take some processing that used to be in your application and actually push it down to the database. So you get this sort of blurry line where, well, is HBase a database or an application server? Or maybe kind of both, right? And that hasn't really been resolved yet. The HBase committers have had these discussions, meet up before, and we haven't really decided like exactly where it is. I think for now we're keeping it as a database.
It's almost a religious war at some level, but
where do you want to focus the project, focus our efforts? Right?
Yeah, well, it's like an operating system conversation. What do you want the function to be? But it's almost as if you can keep it so that it's flexible, you can provision that wherever you want.
Right. So that was our idea with co-processors. Is basically it's a plug-in point, and we'll kind of put that plug-in point out there and see what people do with it.
Cool.
It's pretty new, so we haven't seen a bunch yet, but I think
I think the use cases will drive that. So it's just, I think the best decision is no decision. That's the point, right? It's like,
that's what open source is all about, right? You get people sourced, and if they contribute patches, then all right, now it's done something different.
Question about DevOps. Okay, so DevOps is emerging as a bona fide position in this new era of developer meets operating system developer meets operations guy. I was talking to Jonathan Gray. It's like, hey, at my startup before Facebook, I did everything. I ran the ops, I did the development.
Yep.
That seems to be the profile of this, what I call new profile developer, someone who has chops in code, almost an operating systems kind of guy, and also can run basic operations.
Yeah.
What is your view on that? I mean, do you see that as just a evolution just because this is a new industry? Do you think it's an actual job title? And what skill sets do you look for in your peers and say, that guy's a great DevOps guy?
It's interesting. I think it's actually, I've always looked for those people to try to hire in general. So I think the more you understand the stacks below you and kind of above you, the better you can do at whatever stack you're supposed to be working on. So I also previously at Cloudera worked at a startup and did everything too. So I definitely identify with that. And that was before the term DevOps was coined. So whether it's like a new position.
So you're saying if you're a young gun out there in school, learn up and down the stack.
Yeah, it's like in terms of hiring from Brown in particular, I know the courses there, and the people I look for are the people who did really well in the operating systems course. Because that's the one that makes you actually, you write your code, but then you also have to kind of understand what's below the code. And if you aren't comfortable jumping layers like that, then it becomes difficult later in your career. Maybe you're not working on a kernel anymore, trying to understand or trying to understand hardware, but you're working on Java and you want to understand what does the JDK do. So about once a week I find myself looking at the Sun Java source code. It's freely available. And I kind of want to know the layer below me, right? And similarly, working on HBase, you kind of look at HDFS, or as an application developer, you might want to look at HBase. I think that's the kind of key differentiator. It's it's not exactly DevOps, but it's a familiarity with the layers, kind of adjacent to you in the stack.
Okay, Todd, thanks for joining us inside the Cube.
Sure, no problem.
We'll talk later over a cocktail hour. Todd Lipcon, the senior engineer. I don't know your official title. I was just going to say senior engineer.
We're all just software engineers.
Software
we don't
engineer.
have any titles.
Employee number 10 at Cloudera. He's been there from the beginning. One of the smartest guys I know. Young gun at Cloudera. We've had him on the Cube multiple times. From Brown University. Big plug for you there, and congratulations on your success.
Any Brown students out there? We're hiring. Email me.
Yeah, if you're Brown, you got to go to Cloudera. Nowhere else. Actually, Stanford and MIT, you can go everywhere else.
We'll take all of you, yeah.
Okay, we'll be right back after our next guest.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. All right, so.